Hey everyone, it's Jayson here, OT Schoolhouse Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. As you can tell, things are already starting off a little bit different with some music in the background. I really just wanted to start this episode off by acknowledging all the hard work that you are putting in right now. I just want to let everyone know we're all doing our best. We're all staying strong. We're all trying to help the kids that we work with, as well as the kids that are in our home. The dogs that are in our home while we're trying to provide teletherapy, all that good stuff. And so I just want to say thank you and stay strong. Keep doing what you're doing. The parents of the kids that you are helping are going through a lot as well. And just know that they appreciate every single video that you're creating for that student, every single worksheet that you're sending home, every single Zoom, Google Meets call, whatever way that you are getting to your parents, they are appreciating that. I also want to give a huge thank you to all the healthcare professionals. Of course, us as OTs are healthcare professionals, but for the most part, we're working in education. I want to give a huge shout out to all the OTs and other healthcare professionals working on the front line, in the hospitals, in the nursing facilities that are seeing difficulties, just all those people that are taking care of our loved ones and putting themselves at risk right now. That can't be easy, but again, I just want to say thank you to all of those. And maybe you're a school-based OT and on the weekends you're working at the hospital. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking care of everyone's loved ones, and thank you for taking care of your own loved ones as well. I really appreciate it. All right, so we're going to go ahead and make this a little bit lighter and jump into the episode. But first, here is the intro.
Hello and welcome to the OT Schoolhouse Podcast, your source for school-based occupational therapy tips, interviews, and professional development. Now, to get the conversation started, here is your host, Jayson Davies. Class is officially in session.
Hello, and welcome back. Thank you for bearing with me on that little bit of a somber intro, but I really just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone. All of you are doing a fantastic job. I've heard so many people reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, everywhere, and everyone's just trying to do their best. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Today we have on a very special guest. His name is Tony Nguyen, and he is a special education attorney for parents. Very awesome, and he's going to be joining me in just a moment. You're going to want to stay tuned if that's anything that you've ever been interested in. Just being able to hear why parents go to him, and then also what his job entails and what he's expecting when he sits in on an IEP meeting, or when he is kind of summarizing what's going on in an IEP and has to decide with the parent how to move forward. So we're going to get into all of that in just a minute. But first, I just want to give you guys a quick update. I know people are interested in teletherapy and kind of what I'm doing. I know everyone's doing something different, but I just want to let you all in on what I'm doing. And what that is actually is a combination of asynchronous and synchronous teletherapy. Asynchronous meaning that I'm actually creating videos of activities and sending them out to parents. These videos range anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. Some have even gone slightly longer, like my zones of regulation PowerPoint that I put together. But it's just basically I looked at my kids' goals and their skill ability and basically put them into kind of like a category. And so I'm sending out videos that are specific to the skills that they need to work on to them. They might not be individualized, but they are very specific to the skills that that student needs to work on to meet their goals. So that is the asynchronous version. The synchronous version is that I'm using Zoom to meet with students live, if you want to call it that, virtually live, right? And we're working on some sort of activity. Oftentimes it's the same activity that I'm sending out as a video, but I am doing it there with the parent, coaching the parent and the child through the activity. Sometimes the students and the parents, they don't have all of the tools that I would hope that they would have in their home, like shaving cream or something. And so we adapt and we use what they do have. For some students, that looks like looking at what toys they have and saying, okay, well, how can we make this toy that they have in their house acceptable to, or not acceptable, but how can we make this toy that they have in their house developmentally appropriate so that they can improve their skills? So that's kind of what it looks like right now. I'm excited to keep on going, actually. It does take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of planning, but it has been rewarding so far. All the parents are super appreciative of both the asynchronous and the synchronous teletherapy. So without further ado, I do want to introduce Tony Nguyen. Again, he is the special education attorney at K12edlaw.com. That's where you can find him if you want to learn more about him. I've had the pleasure of sitting in on a few IEPs with him, and he is just a class act guy, and he's doing a lot of cool things. So stay tuned. Here is Tony Nguyen from K12edlaw.com. Hey, Tony, welcome to the OT Schoolhouse podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Finally getting used to this work from home or this COVID-19 thing. So finally getting used to the run of things around here.
Yeah, I think we all are now. I mean, the time that we're recording this, we're about 2 weeks into quarantine, just over 2 weeks into quarantine now. And people are starting to do some therapy. It sounds like schools are starting to figure out kind of what they're going to do. But yeah, we'll talk about that as we get further in. But to start off, I want to give you the opportunity to quickly introduce yourself and share how you got to where you are today as a special education lawyer.
Yeah, so my name is Tony Nguyen. I am a special education attorney, like you said. And how I got into this was actually an interesting story. It had to do with a girl, actually. And when I was in law school, I was dating a special day class teacher for a mild mod class. And we had some distance between us because I was down in San Diego and she was up here in Orange County. And phone calls can be a little monotonous if you have a long distance relationship. So I decided to take up on an externship for a special education law firm representing representing students at that time. And I didn't know anything about it, but I thought, you know what, let's kind of dive into her world and see what she does on a regular basis. And from an externship turned into a law clerk, turned into a paid position. And then after my first year of law school, there was no turning back. I completely dedicated my entire time in law school to studying this. And the other reason why I kind of delve into it and made my decision of going this route is I'm Vietnamese American and I speak Vietnamese. And unfortunately, there aren't any Vietnamese attorneys doing this. So I'm the only Vietnamese speaking special ed attorney in the state.
Wow.
And actually possibly the US. So I have yet to meet one. I'm for sure in the state of California, but outside I'm not sure, but I have not met one yet. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and we do have a pretty big Vietnamese population out here. One of my best friends is Vietnamese, and especially Orange County.
Yeah. Orange County is, if I read it correctly, we're the largest Vietnamese population outside Vietnam.
Oh wow.
So yeah, and California has two of the top the top three locations. So it's here and it's in San Jose. Is the other location with the abundance of Vietnamese residents. So.
Wow. So then have you had quite a few clients then that it really helps having that language or being able to speak Vietnamese and knowing the culture?
Yeah. So when I first started, one of the barriers of all this is raising awareness. And this was about in 2013. So there was still a lot of awareness that still needs to be raised culturally. Mm-hmm. And that had to pick up before I started gaining a lot of clients who were Vietnamese American. And now I would say about a fourth of my client base is Vietnamese, and the rest of them come from all different ethnicities.
Gotcha. All right. I think I already know the answer to this, but are you licensed only in the state of California?
Yes. For now, I'm only in the state of California. I have plans of possibly going to other surrounding states, but right now it's a lot of work here in California.
Yeah. Okay. And so if you do get licensed in other states, then can you kind of do virtual type of stuff?
Yeah. So most of my clients, so I have clients all through the state from here in SoCal as well as up in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. So the Bay Area, in Santa Clara County, I have a lot of clients, and most of it is actually done virtually now. And I think like every other profession, the legal profession has kind of shifted to the virtual, meetings over Zoom, meetings over, video conferencing is very normal now. Yeah. So working out of state, I imagine is the same thing. The only thing that you would have to do in person would likely have to be one. I like to meet the kiddos a lot. All the
Yeah,
kiddos I represent, I actually meet them in person. So that's one.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks. And the other thing is the court systems, you gotta be you gotta be there in person. Whatever court proceedings or administrative law proceedings that they have, you have to be there in person. Um,
Yeah, I really appreciate that you do meet the kids. I feel like a lot of people, a lot of times we're sitting in an IEP and we have an advocate or a lawyer, and it sometimes becomes very clear that the person that we're talking to doesn't know the student. And I mean, yes, you can probably do your job without knowing the student, but I mean, I wouldn't want to go to an IEP without seeing a kid recently. And I'm a professional that works with a kid. And so I think that's kind of just across the board. Everyone should know the kid.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody that comes to the IEP meeting, you become a team member, right? A part of the IEP team, and I feel that everyone needs to know the kid, and the more personal you have interactions with him or her, the better it is. And I think the more your input carries some weight.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So before we get into the specifics about being a special education lawyer, can I ask what's your day-to-day activities look like pre-coronavirus days? Of course, you mentioned a little bit of traveling, potentially Zoom meetings. What are you doing day in, day out?
So I actually get this question quite a bit, and believe it or not, the majority of my day is fielding phone calls. Um, if in this area of law, I think that the really interesting part about it is that kids are by law and by a lot of parents' preference for them to go to school every day,
Hmm.
right? And if parents have concerns about a schooling issue or a special ed issue or anything relating to education, um, they see it every day because every day their kid goes to school. And so potentially every day I have to field a lot of phone calls because
Hmm.
every day there's a new concern. And so that's the majority of my day, believe it or not, is being on the phone with parents, being on the phone with service providers that talk about the kiddo. The other parts of my day, kind of, I guess you could say it's a lot of the clerical side of things, and then I would say another third of my day is actually doing record reviews, writing due process complaints if that's a route that we're going for that particular family. Um, but I would say a majority of the day is hearing parents out because there's so many updates that
Hmm.
happen every day, every week, and to lend an ear for that and to know more about the students' most up-to-date info, as well as providing, I guess you can say, a little bit of emotional support is really important. Is really important for those parents.
Yeah, I can imagine. So before we get into the specifics, you don't represent me, you or any presume or anyone that's probably listening to the show. But as we get kind of more into some detail, is there any sort of disclaimer that I know oftentimes with lawyers, there's some sort of disclaimer?
You know what? It's such a lawyerly thing to do, but it's important. It's important for, I guess, everybody's protection. So anything that we discuss on here is my experience. A lot of it is storytelling, and but any information that's provided here is intended as general information that sometimes you can access through other means. But it's not. It's definitely not intended as legal advice for any parents or any um, particular OTs or any other service professionals that are listening to this for their particular situation. I mean, we're going to be talking about a lot about IEPs and the I in IEPs individualized. So
Yep.
it's hard to talk generally about those kind of things. So yeah, every kiddo is different, every situation is different. So to the information that we discuss here is mostly general information.
Absolutely. So, us OTs, obviously, we work with a lot of kids, but some of us also have some of our own kids with special needs. I personally do not, but I know several who do. First of two questions, I guess. What's the difference between an advocate and a special education lawyer? And then going a little bit further, why do people seek out advocates or special education attorneys?
Yeah, so you know the major difference, to be honest with you, that's more noticeable is just the degree and the license, for a JD and then your bar license.
Mm.
Outside of that, as far as experiences, I've seen a lot of excellent advocates out there who are very knowledgeable, and a lot of them, carry experiences as either, like you said, parents, and they're also professionals. Some of them were previous special education administrators, special education um, uh, service providers, things like that. So they do carry a lot of experience. The only, I guess you could say, some parents would select one over the other is advocates, because they're not licensed as far as lawyers. They tend to be a lot more or less taxing on the fees and the
Yeah.
costs. But on the flip side of that, if you're successful in a claim, let's say you have a claim against a district and you're successful, that success also could come with attorney's fees.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't come with advocate fees. So whatever advocates you may have brought to various proceedings, various meetings, and things like that with the district, those fees are not recoverable if you hire an advocate. So if a parent hires an advocate, and sometimes the advocate cost can be fairly high. I've heard advocates cost upwards to 150 plus per hour. And, some attorneys are just barely over that threshold. So, it sometimes is definitely wise to bring an advocate because it's more cost effective and things like that. On the flip side, a lot of parents later on discover that those fees aren't recoverable, while attorney's fees could be recoverable. So that's one major difference. The other one, to be honest with you, is some parents tell me this. I haven't experienced this myself. Some parents say, I've hired an advocate and I've hired a lawyer. It seems like when I bring the lawyer, I get more of a successful result than when I brought the advocate. And, when I hear those stories, I can only think of, I guess from a district standpoint or a public school standpoint, it's just seeing the threat of litigation, possibly bring an advocate. So those are some of the differences. But I'll tell you, in this state, particularly in California, advocates can represent you at a due process hearing. So as far as going up to the due process hearing, or layman's term would be like a trial in this type of a matter, bringing an advocate or bringing an attorney can be equally as effective depending on their experience. Here is, I would say, is the biggest hurdle that a lot of parents have to get over when they do hire an advocate, is because there's no licensing for them right now as an advocate. And because there's no licensing requirement, there's no regulations as well. So if a parent decides one day to say, look, I've had a lot of parenting experience, I'm going to go out and open shop.
Yeah.
There's no regulations right now. In the state of California, there's no oversight by the state of verifying if these individuals have actually some type of an experience as a baseline to carry on these services. Yeah. And so that parents are fearful of that because they don't know the true experience of the minimal experience of some of these advocates.
Very true. Good point.
Mm-hmm.
And so then going along that, when do you see parents seeking you or advocates out? Why are they coming to you usually?
So there's, I would put them into like maybe three major categories. So for the very first one is that they're just starting off in special ed. So you're looking at early intervention, and you're on the cusp of about 3 years old, and parents go through their very first initial IEP or the initial assessment, actually. Mm-hmm. And they're like, what's going on here?
What am I getting myself into, right?
Yeah, what's going on here? I find, some parents, they get an earlier diagnosis from a medical provider, and they're like, well, why isn't this enough? Why is there so much testing? The process is unfamiliar to them. So sometimes they'll seek me out as a guidance or as a coach, if you will, to kind of just navigate them through the process without any type of legal representation. Most of them have zero violations and zero claims. It's just something that makes them a lot more confident to make parent decisions in the process. So I would say that's the first set of parents. The second set of parents would be parents that are asking for assessments or asking to start something, and there's a disagreement between them and the public school. So a parent might come there and say, look, I have a medical diagnosis. I have suspicions that my kiddo might have some difficulties in school. Can you assess? And this public school denies it for one reason or another. So the kiddo doesn't have an IEP yet at all. Okay. The third set of parents are the ones that have IEPs already, and in their opinion, and their perspective, the IEP went wrong at some point, whether it be that they don't agree with an assessment, services are not adequate for this student, or if year to year goes by and they're seeing no progress, and so issues surrounding an existing IEP already. So I would say early intervention, and then just the start of IEPs or the denial of even the IEP process, and then students with an IEP. So those are the main categorical reasons why I think parents come in.
Yeah, and I often find that, I don't know, I mean, I've been in schools now for about 8 years, and I find that oftentimes there's a miscommunication prior to an advocate or a lawyer showing up with an IEP team. And I really feel like that's where I try to always try to be transparent and stay in communication with the parent, whatever means it takes, because I just feel like oftentimes when you leave an IEP and things just aren't settled, sometimes a few days later, a few weeks later, that's when we get a notice of an advocate or lawyer being on the team.
Yeah, it's great that you bring that up, that your willingness to follow up with possible miscommunications. And a lot of times it is just that. Not every phone call that I get and not every initial consult I have with parents end up in me representing them. A lot of times I say, you know what, it seems like there may be a miscommunication here, like you said, or can you check to see if this is correct? Because I don't want to dive into something where there was a miscommunication that could be easily resolved. But a lot of times I would say is that the feeling that they get is either one, a lack of effort from the IEP team or any of its members, a lack of effort, and two, the lack of response or something relating to truthfulness, and something that there's a disconnect, whether it's not somebody's like particularly lying or anything like that, but maybe parents ask for, I had a recent situation where parents are like, hey, can I get some of his schoolwork? And this particular educator could not provide any schoolwork. And so parents are like, well, what is he doing there all day? Like, can't you give me even one or two worksheets? And they could not. And that's where it gets really difficult for parents. So I guess you could say the mistrust is there, and that's when they would kind of seek my help as well.
Gotcha. All right, cool. So I want to kind of move now into the quote unquote IEP room, if we can, and talk a little bit about evaluations. When you're stepping into an IEP, it's an initial or it's a try. What type of things are you looking for in the evaluations? What kind of things are just kind of in your head that you're looking for? Either this is great or this isn't great.
Yeah. So the very first thing about evaluations, regardless whether it's OT or any other areas, is whether that assessment covered all the areas of suspected need. So if a parent writes a letter or makes some type of an email to say, my kiddo has A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, these are the difficulties that he or she is showing, the assessment should cover all those suspected needs. Now, if obviously if the public school's not seeing any of that, that can be repeated to parents. Hey, we're not seeing this. But I mean, I'm speaking from a parent's perspective. They're seeing it at home. They're not at school with the kiddo,
Mm-hmm.
for the entire time period. So they're like, well, if I see it at home all the time, he or she must do it sometimes at school. But, from my experiences, I'm sure from yours, kiddos act very differently between home and school.
Yeah.
Sometimes better in one environment
Mm-hmm.
or the other, right? But most kids act very similar in all those environments. So I would say, one, make sure all the areas of the educators, what the educators see as potential issues, and what the parents see. That's one. The second one is the lack of data. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a certain testing protocol or testing procedure that you're going to use. And the testing procedure has multiple subtests. Okay. If I see a testing procedure that I know have, let's say, 4 or 5 different subtests, and I only see 1 or 2
Mm-hmm.
as the report, that's gonna really make me alerted, because okay, why wasn't it completed? Now, if there's a
Reasoning.
legitimate explanation for it, absolutely. A lot of times is the child is too low functioning, or for whatever reason that test may be excluded, then great. But if there's no explanation about that,
Mm-hmm.
that's problematic. That's really problematic. Or if I see blank grids, believe it or not, I see blank grids all the time for subtests.
Wow.
For multiple areas, I will see some using a percentage or a grade equivalency, and then others using a scaled score or standard score, but they don't report all areas. They don't report all of it. And
Gotcha.
I'm going beyond OT testing here.
Yeah.
There's other areas of testing that does that.
Of course.
The third one I definitely look at is whether or not the assessments interact with the other assessments. Okay, so let's say you have an OT, and the OT assessment says, we couldn't perform all the testing because of behavioral issues. Okay, and that's very common. That's very common, especially for sensory seekers, kiddos on the spectrum, things like that. But the testing, when they say that the kiddo has a lot of behaviors, it doesn't relate to the maybe a functional behavior analysis. So a recent case, I had a kiddo who had the tendency of throwing things and slapping educators or staff's hands. Okay, when he or she didn't get what they wanted. And so from that particular targeted behavior, that behavior of slapping and throwing things never made its way on another assessment like an FBA as a targeted behavior. So while it's identified, done greatly by the OT, you look over at the FBA and you're like, why did it not make its way over there? And so the interacting between testing and assessments is really important for me. Going with behaviors, and that reminds me of a recent situation as well, where I had a kiddo with behaviors. So the OT had literally 2 pages. The OT report had 2 pages. And while I can't speak to how lengthy a report should be, the first half a page just had the kiddo's demographics. Right? But what it said was the kiddo had such severe behaviors that we had to discontinue testing. And then, but the assessment only made 1 trial of doing the assessments.
Yeah, and
So
you need to be able to state, okay, well, the student wasn't able to do it, and then, like you said, try again potentially. But then, even if you can't do that, you can still get into the classroom, do up some observations, go out to recess, go out to whatever, get observations on multiple occasions. So that's what I would expect to see.
Yeah. I mean, you hit it on the nail. I actually, if that's not possible, at least observe. And when you observe, one of the things I look at is where you observed, how long you observed for, and what date you observed. Just like adults. We have good days and we have bad days.
Yes.
And so the kiddos are the same way. We have good days and we have bad days. And if you've only made one attempt, it's really hard to show that that's a true indication of the kiddo's ability, of the student's ability. So doing your observations is extremely important, especially if their difficulties surround unstructured activities, structured activities, classroom settings, things like that. I think observations need to cover all those areas. Yeah.
Okay. I want to move on, but I want a quick answer for this one. Number one reason for IEE request.
Parents' disagreement. The IEE reports show difficulties, and there was a denial of services somehow.
Okay. And just for everyone out there, in case IEE isn't a nationwide term, it's an independent educational evaluation. All right. So again, really want to get to goals and services because I know that's what the OTs listening are going to want to hear about. But the present levels, really quickly, what are you looking for? What are you not looking for?
Yeah, so a lot of present levels right after usually a triennial. I know a lot of districts' practices is cutting and pasting from your assessment reports and dragging it right into the present levels.
Mm-hmm.
But assessment reports don't test every skill within the classroom setting or even an unstructured setting, right? Standard scores don't relate to an actual skill level sometimes. And so what I'm looking for in present levels are specific skills that's expected during that age group.
Mm-hmm.
And where's the kiddo at then? Okay. So if a kiddo's in kindergarten and typical peers, perform this way, how is this kiddo doing in that certain area? So present levels, what I look for is not just standard scores because that doesn't cover anything.
Yeah.
Because standard scores don't always convert to goals, right?
Oh, they
so
shouldn't,
present
in
levels,
my opinion.
They should not. So putting just standard scores on present levels alone in the IEP doesn't really cover the entire skill set that the student has.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's move on to goals then. I talk a lot about SMART or SMART-E goals on the podcast, the E being educationally relevant. But one thing I remember you noting is the baselines when it comes to goals. And I sometimes think baselines get overlooked. So what do you think should be in those baselines if you're writing a goal?
Yeah, so baselines that's the first thing I look at when I look at goals, truly. Just think of baselines as starting points, right? And starting points is, we all write goals usually from an annual basis, so for the following year, and but we need to know where we're at today. Okay, so relating back to the present levels and using standard scores, what I see sometimes are problematic baselines are using standard scores as a baseline. The student standard score for this skill is this.
Yeah.
But in your goals, you always have either a 4 out of 5 times or you have a percentage accuracy, right?
Yeah.
Those two have to relate to one another. If we're saying, I'll give you an example, we want a student to hit a certain skill at 80%, right? You can't give me a standard score on the baseline because there's no way to indicate where they're at.
Yeah.
Right? You have to give me likely a percentage. What I generally say is the baseline needs to be almost as specific as the goal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what I've been trying to do recently. Yeah, it's just making sure that, you basically have to rewrite the goal into the baseline and say where that student is. And if you're going to do 4 out of 5 attempts for your goal, then in your baseline, if you can, try and say how many times the student can hit the ball or whatever in 5 attempts. Maybe right now they're at 1 out of 5 attempts.
I think what you just said is an excellent tip. It's pretty much writing the goal, but where they're at right now, and that's it. So that's a really good tip. The other thing I really see problematic in baselines are really vague terminology. So going back to the student performing a certain skill at 80%, and in the baseline, I'll say, Johnny is having a hard time throwing a ball. Johnny is having a hard time gripping a pencil.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny doesn't like holding a pencil. Things like that have no specificity to the goal is could be really problematic. And I'll tell you why it's problematic. And this is, I'll be honest with you, this is how I present it to parents when they come to me and I'm looking at their goals. So let's say you have year number 1, you don't have a baseline. You don't have a legit baseline.
Mm-hmm.
And your goal is at 80%. Okay. Year number 2 comes around, and the student, let's say, doesn't meet the goal entirely.
Mm-hmm.
A service provider might say, hey, can we continue this goal? And parents are like, great, let's continue it. But what happens? The goal, just by habit, gets copied and pasted into the new IEP of year 2, along with the baseline. The baseline doesn't get renewed.
Oh, man.
So now you have 2 consecutive years with bad baselines, but the same goal, right?
Yep.
Well, parents really don't catch on sometimes until the 3rd year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when there's like, wait a second.
Same goal 3 years in a row.
Yeah, with no renewed baseline. So from a parent standpoint, they feel kind of like, wait, so how's my kiddo doing? How's Johnny
Mm-hmm.
doing? But on the flip side, from a district standpoint, it may be really hard to even demonstrate progress if your baselines never get renewed.
I agree. Sometimes I sit in IEP meetings and I personally like to say a goal is either not met or it's met. I don't really like using the partially met term. I will say a goal is not met, but progress was made and this is what that progress was. But I feel like a lot of times you get that vague progress was made, but it wasn't met. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen it. I'm sure you've done it.
I've done it.
A certain skill. You've seen a certain skill that a student needs, and the student is just having a hard time meeting it, right? And you want to continue it because the skill is so important. It's so foundational, maybe. But if you don't renew the baseline, it's actually really hard for you to know whether or not the kid made progress as service providers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what if you get transferred from one assignment to another?
Yep.
The following OT is going to come in there and go, wait, what? Like, where was this kiddo at? And what might happen is you start duplicating the same services as far as like how you do things that maybe didn't work before. And so sometimes that happens as well. So yeah.
Okay.
I would say baselines are so critical. That's the first thing I look at in a goal, actually. I don't care what the goal looks like. I actually care what the baseline looks like. I care what the baseline looks like. And I think it's one of those things where I look at to really see progress or not.
Cool.
And remember, if you continue to goal, update the baseline.
Yeah.
Because it's the present level, right? That you got to update it.
Absolutely. All right. So one more thing with goals, I want to ask you because in the OT world, there's kind of this, we are educationally based, right? We're not working at a private practice. And in a private practice, we often have very OT specific goals. But in the classroom, a lot of it is educationally relevant. And we're trying to help that student do educational skills. Do you have a take one way or the other on, I don't want to even just call it OT specific goals, but service provider related goals versus IEP team goals as a whole or collaborative goals? I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Now, by collaborative goals, I'm guessing working with either the gen ed or the special ed teacher.
Yeah. So for instance,
way.
Instead of a specific OT goal to write or to maybe like write individual letters, we might tag on to a teacher goal that is for the student to create a sentence. And it's an educational goal, but we are doing our part to support that goal.
Yeah. So what I usually do, I know exactly where you're getting at. What I usually do is look at it from a skill standpoint. So if a student, just going off of your example, if the student has organizational difficulties on writing a sentence or writing a paragraph, right? That organizational difficulty is a different skill set than possibly legibility.
Yeah.
Right. If you can, and I've seen it done where you can merge those two into one goal. Okay. But the problem is that your goal is going to be very lengthy. It's going to be very lengthy because you're going to have to get specific on what legibility is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to have to get specific on what the rubric for a structured paragraph, let's just say, looks like. What I would say is just split those
Split 'em up.
into two goals.
Yeah.
Split those into two goals. And what you can write down under the notes section is it relates to each other. You know, goal number 1 from the academic writing goal relates to goal number 1 from the OT legibility and fine motor goal or something like that.
Absolutely.
So it interacts with each other. When I see those goals are so difficult, I would split them. And here's another reason why. Because a student's organization, let's say, for example, the organization is absolutely met by the following year, but the legibility is still horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, if you combine those two goals together into one goal, it's not met,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when that happens, you know, I'll relate it back to your miscommunication, right? Where parents are like, wait, my kid's not making progress. Well, the kiddo might have made progress in the organizational sense, but unmet on the legibility sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say, you know, splitting them is a benefit. The last benefit of actually splitting these goals when you're thinking about it is 2 years from now, if let's say there's some dispute between the district and an OT gets called in as a witness,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for some type of a hearing, you'll know which goals you're absolutely responsible for.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of seeing a big goal that has multiple skills and then you're confused of what was your part.
I never thought about it from that way. That's a good way to think about it. Always, what would happen when you get to due process?
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things where I think looking from the other lens, it's like taking ownership of your specialty, of your expertise, right? And that's in this case fine motor, or you know, with that goal.
Gotcha.
So
cool.
Yeah.
No, thank you. This question wasn't on our little list of things that I wanted to ask you, but according to the law, what is the IEP team's responsibility when it comes to meeting goals? And I don't know this because I've heard it over the years. It's like, well, the kid needs to meet their goals. Well, no, they need to make progress on the goals. No, it doesn't matter if they make progress on their goals as long as we're doing our job to try and help them make progress on our goals. But you might have a better idea on this.
Yeah, so it's clear as mud as many times as courts go through this, but technically they don't have to meet every single goal. They have to make the meaningful progress in them. And you know, the latest case was a couple of years ago on the standard of what's appropriate and what's meaningful and all these things. But what at the end of the day is that the kiddo has to make progress.
Mm-hmm.
You know, no doubt about it. Now, that doesn't mean this either. You know, you go from one annual IEP to another and they don't make progress. It doesn't mean that, oh man, that the world's going to fall apart. No, you reassess it, right? You reassess the situation, maybe through formalized testing or maybe through less formalized testing. And you may add more goals. You may adjust certain goals. You may adjust methods of implementation, accommodations, supplementary aids, services. So you have this big toolbox of how to adjust them. You know, the law doesn't require everybody to get this stuff perfect. That's why I think that a lot of people call the IEP like a living document, right? Like it can be changed at any point. And so with that said, you don't have to get it perfect on the first try. It's just on that day when you guys met at a particular IEP meeting, what was appropriate right then and there. It's a snapshot of that meeting.
Yeah.
And then anything that happens after that, whether it be changes in whatever circumstance, from a district standpoint, from a kiddo standpoint, changes can be made. The I guess where things sometimes go wrong is when changes are not made, right? And the kiddo still hasn't made progress. So you have a lot of tools in your toolbox from both from a parent side, from a district side, to really make changes to get it as right as possible.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, kiddo has to make progress.
Yeah. Yeah,
still has to make
of
progress.
course. And you don't know, again, going back to those baselines and the goals, you don't know if they're making progress if you're not putting in baselines and then updating those. And it's all a big circle, right? An IEP
Yeah,
year.
yeah. So I think you're right with that. If you don't have those baselines, those are the things that you can show for yourself and for the parents of where the student is as far as progress goes.
Yeah.
And let's get real. Um, every year, is a kiddo going to make some progress? Possibly. But is it enough to say, yep, the kid's making progress? No, that
That's
doesn't
true.
happen all the time.
No.
And when that doesn't happen, it's okay to say he didn't make progress, but this year, these are the changes we're going to make.
There you go.
And if those changes are agreeable and parents feel that's appropriate, then you're not going to have any problems.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. All right. So let's jump into services a little bit. I'm going to try and ask you some sort of question about this. I don't know how it's going to come out, but services are so dynamic, right? And we already talked about plops, the present levels. We talked about goals. And as you know, plops lead to goals and goals lead to services. So now we're getting to near the end of the IEP. What are you looking for in those services?
Okay. So the first thing is that, when parents come to me, the first thing they ask me is like, "Hey, my services page, like, why are these lacking?"
Yeah.
Right? They don't think about what you just said of the goals and then the present levels or even, assessment information sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
They just look straight at the services page and go, "This is what I got." Now, when that happens, you're right. You have to look at everything that comes before that. I usually tell parents it's called, when you want to get where you want to be, you need a GPS. And so needs, right, are shown
Mm-hmm.
in present levels and assessments. And then G stands for goals, P stands for placement, S stands for services. So
I
you need
like
a
it.
GPS. And when you get to the S part, when you get to the services part, the service provider has to be able to realistically say that given the amount of needs and goals here, this kiddo can make progress on this much of service or this style of service. Okay. And a lot of times, it doesn't match at all on its face. It doesn't. One of my worst cases was actually for a speech service. A, a kiddo was a student was nonverbal and gets 50 minutes of speech, 50 minutes of speech per year.
Wow.
Per year. Okay. And it's not a typo because it was written in for year after year. And obviously, on its face, no educator, no specialist can look at that and say, yeah, that's legit. But I think the more important thing is from year to year, if the kiddo has more goals or more difficult goals
Mm-hmm.
that he or she is not making, something's got to change. Something's got to change, whether it be the method of delivery, whether it be the amount, the frequency of it. A lot of public schools like to write things in a yearly sense to have more flexibility for a certain service. So let's say like 1,000 minutes for an entire year
Mm-hmm.
versus you shrink it down per week. Sometimes writing it per week makes more sense to the IEP team because now you're committed to consistency.
Yeah.
You're committed to consistency because if you write it in a year, technically you can load it all to 1 month or 2 months and you're actually covered.
Yep.
But it doesn't really change. I'll tell you where services kind of nowadays kind of fall apart. There's a lot of classes and a lot of programs where services are embedded.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're in autism month here, so a lot of it has to do with these autism specific classes. So autism specific classes or special day classes sometimes offer a social component, a behavioral component, and an OT component, all embedded in the class.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the speech pathologist, the OT, and the behavioral specialist would come in for an X amount of time every week because that's the bare minimum for that program.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But here's the thing. while it may be appropriate, let's say, that the OT comes in through a collaboration model, working with that special ed teacher and working with the students in the classroom for, let's say, an hour a week, some schools don't write it into the service grid. Okay. And a school might call one, like, let's say this autism specific program is called program number one. If a child moves from that district to a new district,
Mm-hmm.
their programs are not going to be named the same. They're not going to be named. The autism
Oh,
program
yeah.
might not be named program number one. It might be named program number two,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody knows what's embedded.
Yeah.
What worked in district number one, let's say there's no OT component in
Yeah.
program number two. Then how is a parent supposed to know? So the parent knows that it was working in the first district, moves to the second district, still an autism program, but maybe that autism program doesn't have an OT component. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So even through if it's embedded in a certain program, it needs to be specific enough, or else parents are going to think, and this may be a miscommunication,
Uh-huh.
that there's no service in
Yeah. So let's go back to that then. So then you
that.
would like to see, using the example, the OT goes into that classroom an hour a week to collaborate. You would like to
Mhm.
see on that IEP then that service basically 1 hour of OT per week going in the
Mhm.
classroom, collaboration.
Correct. Correct. And then the reason why is, and you can write, there's always a note section in
Hmm.
every service grid to say, why are you choosing this model or this frequency? You can write, oh, this is part of the district's autism program.
Okay.
This is
Yeah.
embedded in district's office. Yeah. So, going back to the dangers of that is actually, from I guess from a district standpoint, they might look at it of a parent coming in and go, "There's no OT. Why is there no OT in my service grid? I have OT goals." But when
Mm,
they've never heard it's been embedded in the program, and then they
yeah.
hear it after they raise the concerns, it could lead to a mistrust or a miscommunication.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus if you write it in and you say this is the embedded program, and as more and more specific programs come up, um, these are the issues that I'm seeing, especially if parents move away. They don't know what that program entailed that worked for their kiddo. And so their kiddo moves and everything falls apart because of
Gotcha. Yeah. We always have to keep
that.
in mind that a parent or a student could up and move the next day and be in a whole new environment. So, all
Hmm.
right. So we're through the IEP, went over the plop services, all that good stuff. What is your role after that parent? Now you are already with that parent, or the student. What's your role if the parent then decides they don't necessarily agree with the services and everything?
Yeah. So, when a parent leaves an IEP, they have the right to either not sign for the IEP, not consent to it. They can partially consent to it, or they can consent to the entire thing, right? A lot of times, if they don't agree, what I think all of our experiences is that they don't sign at all,
Mhm.
right? They don't sign at all. They don't want anything changed. Um, my goal at that point is to talk to the parent, and I'll be candid with you. I ask them, what are you looking for? What is it that you feel is lacking from these IEPs? Now, if they say, well, I know that I have a special day class, I have OT services, and I have speech, and I only have problems with my OT service. Well, if that's the only thing you have problems with, then
Partial.
you might want to think about considering signing for the other two, right? For
Hmm.
your special day class and for your speech, at least. I think what parents come to me and hear a lot is a lot of districts somehow getting the message across, and this could be a miscommunication or not, that if they don't sign it, they don't get the services. And that's what the parents hear. If you don't sign, you don't get services. But a lot of times, what teachers and case managers um, mean to say is, if you don't sign it, you're not going to get the current services that
Goals.
we proposed in this particular IEP. It's not like your IEP gets cut,
Yeah.
right? So when they come to me, that's the feeling that they usually get. Okay, they have a feeling that services are not going to be provided because it's not adequate. Um, what I usually do is engage in discussion, a really in-depth discussion of what is it that they think that could make this to be the appropriate IEP it should be. And this conversation usually starts there and it ends somewhere of, he hasn't been making progress or she hasn't um, ever gotten any of these services really, because failure to implement or
Mhm.
whatever the cases may be. So my role immediately afterwards is try to come up with a method of conflict resolution. And sometimes it's just reaching out to the administration and saying, hey, do you want to talk about this? And trying to resolve it without any type of formalities. And sometimes that doesn't work and we have to seek a little bit more formal means. But really most parents come to me and they go, look, I just want what's right for my kid. And I want to resolve this in the quickest and least
Of
painful way
course.
possible. Because when you start going through the formal litigation route, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of stress, heartache, things like that from both sides. You know, parents didn't become parents to file lawsuits or anything like that, and educators didn't go into their field, especially in special education,
Nope.
knowing that there'll be a witness in something like that. And so so m- my general personality and the way I usually handle things is, okay, what's the easiest way on on the parent side? 'Cause that's my top interest. For the student, what if the student needs something right away? They don't have time to litigate, you know? And then also, thinking about the IEP team afterwards, after the conflict is resolved, how does
Mhm.
that work? And so all those dynamics play together, and it's usually a very successful outcome. My success rate for reaching some type of agreement with the district is very high, because I think there's that working relationship. Mhm.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I respected about our meetings together is just how respectful you are, how you kind of have a way to see things from all points of view, and it seems like you have a good rapport with your parents and even with the IEP team. So it's nice to have you on board. um, all right, so we'll dive into this just a little bit. That is the coronavirus. Um, there's so much that we could go on and on about this. I'm sure you are talking to many people about this, and you probably have parents asking you a lot of questions. I just want to ask you, in your perfect world with everything going on, obviously we can't take coronavirus out or social distancing out, but what would you like to see as far as how the students are getting their education and services?
If to be frank, I think that you know sometimes school providers, school employees have different rights than private service providers. Because they work for essentially the government. And a lot of times, as far as my understanding goes, a lot of non-public agencies and private providers are still working to this very day. I have ABA companies that are still working, um, and things like that. So
Interesting.
I think in a perfect world, to finding those resources for those kiddos is really important. The downside of that is that it's very costly to outsource things. It's very
Mhm.
costly, and everybody's aware of that.
Yeah.
The thing is that for your most, particularly for your most vulnerable, severe populations, um, that's still needed. So I still think for the extent that you can access private parties to still provide this in a direct sense, um, that still needs to happen. I've had a lot of phone calls from parents after the first week where the shock wore off. I've
Mhm.
gotten a lot of phone calls, and the phone calls, uh, from a parent standpoint, is that they're very understanding. I haven't had a parent that I think you described in one of your podcasts as like the helicopter parent or anything like that, where they're very upset. They're not. They totally get it.
Uh-huh.
They totally
Well,
get
that's
it.
good to hear.
They totally get it. But I think the more upset ones are going to be the ones where there are school districts out there locally in Southern California that have flat out said, um, you know, students doing this online thing, everybody's voluntary because when they don't make it mandatory for the gen ed population, then special ed rights are limited,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so those parents are more and more upset, because what happens is that in the special ed population, they're more vulnerable to regression,
Yeah.
you know? And even though I totally get, the high responsibilities that school districts have, and particularly in our state of California, where executive orders are coming out
Oh,
that you got to continue providing this,
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes it a very difficult responsibility. It's a true responsibility, but it makes it very difficult. So I think, whatever, in a nutshell, whatever private providers can, whatever direct service you can still provide, you got to find a way to provide.
Yeah.
You got to find a way to provide it, because that will, in my opinion, what that does is that it mitigates regression. It mitigates against these kiddos losing skills, because what happens is, let's say right now, I know the superintendent of schools is anticipating the school year being over,
Mm-hmm.
but there's nothing that says ESY, or extended school year, is over.
Yep.
And there's nothing that says, you know, it from right now, it looks like the start of the next school year is when things are going to go.
Yeah.
You're going to have a lot of kiddos coming back with IEPs that are the same, that won't get revisited
Mm-hmm.
when the students' present levels have dropped severely.
True.
And so, to mitigate that right now and through potential summers through private providers is something I think needs to be heavily looked into. And I think incentives for private providers to ask their employees to come in and work, from my experiences of friends and family who do work in the private sector of special needs, they're still working. A lot of them are still working. So,
Are they,
with that
are you,
said,
sorry, are you
go
hearing
ahead.
them as doing, you're saying they're still working. Are they doing it directly in the house, or are they doing it teletherapy, or a variation?
Some of them are still doing it in the house. Some of them are still doing it in the house. It's very limited. But like I said, I think that the most vulnerable populations need to,
Yeah.
those things need to be in place. If that, I would say, at all costs, right?
Yeah.
At all costs, that needs to happen. And, from a protection standpoint, I think, those private companies, and I don't know this in a legal sense, but obviously they can't price gouge either, right?
Yeah, of course.
In these, so I think, yeah, while it might be a little bit of a premium, I don't think it's going. I think it's worth it, given the fact that if you wait essentially 5 to 6 months before school starts, you're looking at a half a year, annual year that's gone by, and these kiddos are not receiving services. And to be frank with you, that's what I'm setting up for. From my service, I have to set my office up for that.
Yeah.
Because I know that it's going to be a lot, and I know it's going to be very difficult for everyone, including the schools. It's going to be very difficult.
Oh, yeah. And personally, I mean, this morning I was kind of going through my caseload, trying to figure out, okay, which students do I know will be able to benefit if I send home worksheets? What students will be able to benefit if I create a video for a parent and kind of say, okay, parent, this is an activity you can do. Try doing it this way, and here's a way to accommodate it. And then other students, it's like, okay, well, what students will benefit from me doing it live? And let's be frank, there's some students that just, I mean, they barely attend. Yeah, I mean, they can't attend to me when I'm in the room with them.
Yeah.
And so virtual is going to be difficult. And that's where I think what you just said, if school districts may or may not be looking into that, the private route, or however it's going to happen. Because, I mean, they're going to have to provide the service at some point or another, or offer the service at some point or another. I mean,
yeah, and I think what you're doing is awesome. I think all it took for you to do that was effort, right?
yeah,
Like, and parents, they would love to hear it in that sense of that you're trying, versus most of the parents that have called me that said, I got this worksheet, I don't even know how to do it. My kiddo's nonverbal. Why is he or she getting this worksheet with nothing else, like with even no instruction sometimes? And I think that to a parent, that the parents that I've spoken to, they don't feel that that pushes the I in IEP. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't push them. It feels like, okay, so they're making mass copies of this worksheet or whatever, and they're handing it to everyone. For the kiddos that are higher functioning, some of them literally tell their parents, Mom, Dad, this online program that they're telling us to go on, I skipped this during the regular school day because I can't do it. This is not appropriate for me.
Yeah.
And so hearing that, it makes it very difficult for parents. And so, an OT like you, that effort is beyond words. It's awesome that you can do that for your set of students.
Yeah, thanks. I know a lot of us OTs out there, we've been very active on Facebook, Instagram, trying to help each other, trying to figure out what we can do, how to make Zoom work, how to set up a meeting on Zoom, how to do all this stuff. I mean, we're trying to learn. I mean, we're learning more than our students right now, I think. Just trying to figure out everything.
And I think with this I guess declaration from the superintendent of schools saying, hey, be prepared, the school year is likely over, I think that's going to shift a lot of thoughts. And to be honest with you, I try to look at things from a very positive light. I think after this, these things are going to be seamless. I think after this, if a kiddo goes, I'll give you an example. If a kiddo goes in home instruction because of some catastrophe or something that made them be more appropriate at school, everyone will know exactly what to do. Because now they shift everything to a virtual, to a whatever type of technique and delivery method, and they do it. So I'm thinking about the HHIs, the home hospital instruction kiddos who need all these services, who might not be able to go to school because of a medical condition or something like that. Now, the HHI program are going to be a lot more fruitful.
There you go.
So from a positive standpoint, I think the logistics for that would be super cool. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, no matter which way you look at it, the world has been forever changed. There's no doubt about that. I mean, things are virtual now, and we're learning that they can be virtual. So, yeah. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I want to give you the opportunity real quick to share whatever resource you might have for people that might be interested in learning a little bit more about you.
Yeah. For me, my website is www.k12, so K12, edlaw.com. So K12edlaw.com. I have, majority of my phone calls are with parents, but I have a lot of teachers and educators and service providers calling me. And most of the times I defer for them to listen to the public schools council, but a lot of times it's something of a quick concern or a quick question. I'm more than happy to answer anything I can with that. I think the other resource that I recommend a lot of educators and service providers and even parents is called the Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual. It's a really easy read. It's a Q&A read, and it's put on by give me one second here. It's put on by Disabilities Rights California, and if you Google search Special Education Rights and Responsibilities and Disabilities Rights California, that's a publication that you can access, and it's called the Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Manual, and it's a PDF file, Q&A form, super easy to navigate, and it'll answer a lot of your questions, and it'll actually lead you to sections and codes in the law that talks about that.
Gotcha.
If you need to access that.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll put a link to both of those resources in the show notes for OT Schoolhouse. So you'll be able to access those if they go to our website. Great, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Jayson, thanks. Anytime. Let's do this again soon with other topics or something something more fun even.
Yes, drink in hand next time. All right, man. Well,
Absolutely.
have a good one. I'll see you later.
Cool.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, man. Bye.
All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed Tony Tai Nguyen from K12edlaw.com. He's a really chill guy, as you can hear. He has a lot of knowledge. He's amazing. If you do have any questions, reach out to him. I want to thank him so much for just giving such thorough answers. I mean, he was open for any question I had. I really appreciate that. So yeah, I hope you all are doing well. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you next time on the OT Schoolhouse Podcast. Take care, and thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the OT Schoolhouse Podcast. For more ways to help you and your students succeed right now, head on over to otschoolhouse.com. Until next time, class is dismissed.